Welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in today because we're going to learn how to deconstruct arguments, almost like an architect inspecting a building. We're diving straight into lesson 44 from our materials, premise and conclusion. By the time we wrap up, you're going to have a new structural superpower. You'll be able to look at absolutely any text, strip away all the fancy decoration, and see exactly how the author's logic is held together, or, as you'll see, why it sometimes completely falls apart. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for mastering reading comprehension today. 1. The anatomy of persuasion. 2. Spotting the underlying premise. 3. Finding the final conclusion. 4. Testing the argument's strength. And 5. Your critical thinking toolkit. Section 1. The anatomy of persuasion. Building a solid foundation. Think of every academic argument you read as a building. If an architect totally forgets to pour a solid foundation, what happens? The roof collapses. Keep that in mind and think about your own everyday life. Have you ever been reading an article or maybe listening to a debate and found yourself completely unconvinced? You might not have been able to pinpoint exactly why in that moment, but your brain recognized a structural flaw. You instinctively knew that building was unsafe. Our source material hits the nail on the head with this core rule. Stance without support is weak and fails to stand up to scrutiny. This is basically the golden rule of academic reading and writing. A stance, an author's main claim or opinion, can't just float around in midair. An unsupported stance must always be questioned. So, to understand how to actually support a stance, we first need to define what an argument is in an academic context. Our text defines an argument as a written or spoken discussion based on reason, logic, and evidence, right? It's not just two people yelling at each other. And it's super important to note that a text can have one massive, overarching main argument, which is then propped up by a bunch of smaller supporting arguments. Section 2. Spotting the underlying premise, the foundation. This brings us to the very first core component of our anatomical breakdown, the foundation of our metaphorical building. Our source explicitly defines a premise as a statement or idea that an argument is based on. You can kind of think of the premise as the raw material. It's the underlying assumption, the hard data point, or the initial claim that an author decides to build their ultimate case on. Simply put, without a premise, there is no foundation. Section 3. Finding the final conclusion, the roof. Once we've spotted the foundation, we've got to look up at the roof. The textbook definition of a conclusion is the final part of a written or spoken text which sums up the whole text and the logical result of the premise. Now, a quick heads up here. It's vital to realize that in this context, a conclusion isn't just the final sentence of a paragraph. No, it's the definitive stance the author wants you to adopt based on their evidence. It is the final destination they've been driving you toward this whole time. And this brilliantly illustrates how we can deconstruct these structures. Take a look at this textbook argument. On the left, our foundation, the premise. She committed a crime before. On the right, the roof, the conclusion, she will commit one again. When you break it down like this, the logical leap is pretty glaring, isn't it? I mean, just because the premise is true, does it actually guarantee that massive conclusion? No way. That roof is barely supported. Let's look at another one, straight from our sources. Premise: people in poor areas commit more crimes. Conclusion: he lives in a poor area, so will go on to a life of crime. Wow, when you isolate the premise and the conclusion side by side like this, the complete absurdity and weakness of the logic just jump right out at you. A major takeaway here is that just because an author presents a premise, it doesn't mean their conclusion naturally or logically follows. Section 4. Testing the argument's strength. Does it hold up? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how academic textbooks deliberately challenge students to identify weaknesses in argument structures. In this specific excerpt, you're asked to look at premises and conclusions regarding intelligence and crime, and immediately start hunting for flaws. Not all arguments are logical, right? Their overall strength relies entirely on the relationship between that specific premise and that specific conclusion. Well, one of the best ways to test an argument's strength is to look closely at the author's own words. Authors practically give away the strength of their premises through what we call evaluative language and hedging. Check out these examples from the text. If an author uses a word like allege or phrases like supposedly objective, they're sending out a flare, signaling a highly debated, weaker premise. But if they use phrases like, it is reasonable to accept, or it is also worth noting, they are pointing to general agreement and a much firmer foundation. The language literally gives the structural integrity away. Section 5. Your critical thinking toolkit. Applying the lesson. We've covered a lot of ground today, so let's bring it all together. So, the crucial point is this 3-step critical thinking framework for dissecting any academic text. Step 1. Identify the final conclusion. What is the absolute ultimate stance the author is taking? Step 2. Isolate the underlying premises. What is the actual foundation they're building this on? And step 3. Evaluate if the evidence actually logically connects the two, or if they're just making a massive leap. I really want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As you go forward, whether you're reading a really complex academic paper or just listening to a pitch, never accept the roof without first inspecting the foundation. Next time you're presented with an argument, pause and ask yourself, what exactly are they building this conclusion on? Is it solid rock or is it just sand? Keep questioning, keep inspecting, and I will see you in the next explainer.